making a lifestyle choice. That these were the kids that would go missing every weekend. And the abusers would target them because they knew they were vulnerable. Is that the grooming gangs are made up predominantly of Pakistani Muslim men from a lower class within Pakistan. And the job of the police and the criminal justice system is to prosecute those abusers, not to turn a blind eye.
Hi everybody, and welcome back to Nick Talks. This episode's amazing guest is Maggie Oliver. Maggie Oliver has been one of the main voices in the UK trying to highlight the issue of child sexual exploitation, and she now runs her own foundation, now she's left Greater Manchester Police, trying to help and support victims of this horrendous crime. We're going to get into this in a minute, but what shocks me most of all is A, this has ever happened. B, this has went on for decades and decades, and 10,000s of girls have been raped and abused. And there's still no public outcry really for this. But we're going to get into that. So first of all, welcome Maggie to the show.
Lovely to be here, Nick, and thank you for inviting me on.
You're welcome. So let's start with a little bit about you. Who are you? What's happened? How did you get here? Why are you sat in front of me today?
How long have you got? Well, I always describe myself as just an ordinary woman. I was married to the love of my life. We met when we were 20. We had 4 children. For a few years, I was a stay-at-home mum. And then as my youngest got to school, I went back to university because I was going to teach. And then for my sins, in the final year, I decided, well, if I don't get into teaching, what else could I do? And I don't know why, but I decided to apply to become a police officer with Greater Manchester Police. And to my surprise, I guess, I was 41 years old, and I was accepted, posted to Moss Side, which is anybody from Manchester, in those days, in the 1990s, was known as Gunchester, and it was gangs and guns and drugs and, and I thought, what on earth are they sending me here for? I am just this ordinary woman, 4 kids, and actually when I was, I had to do 2 years in uniform, and I came to realize that it was actually an inspired placement for me because I was good with people and I don't judge people. My motto was always do as you would be done by. And I very quickly, I had a lot of difficulties in my probation, in my 2-year probation, with bullying and with antiquated ideas. And I felt that it was going back into the dark ages in many ways. That is another story though, Nick. And I think I've just mentioned, if anybody really wants to know more about my background and the early days of my policing career, you can get my book Survivors on Amazon. Maybe you can share the link in whatever. But I never wanted to be a uniform officer. I always wanted to be working in serious crime and actually child protection. And I did do some time in child protection, but very quickly realised that police become involved mainly with the offenders. My skills are with victims, with vulnerable people, and I went into the police to make a difference, to do good. So immediately out of my probation, my superintendent, who was very wise, he asked me to become involved in a very high profile murder, a gang job. And I did some witness protection work. I then became a family liaison officer working in serious crime, went in CID. But because of my recognised skills, in 2004, unfortunately, my husband was terminally ill. But I was asked to join an investigation looking at that case was looking at children who we knew were being abused by multiple offenders. It's now become known as child sexual exploitation or grooming gangs. And that is what I'm known for. But that was my first introduction to what is now referred to as grooming gangs, I didn't even know that this particular kind of crime existed before then, because it had been hidden, covered up, if you like. There was no public debate around it. But I very quickly learned from speaking to social workers, from dealing with professionals who worked with these children, that this had been a problem for years, and that the police were turning away from this kind of crime. And I couldn't understand why. One of the reasons, Nick, was because in those days, these children were on Operation Augusta. Those children were in care, and child protection units dealt with child abuse, where the perpetrator, where the abuser had care, custody, or control of that child, which means like a father or an uncle or family abuse or a teacher or a scoutmaster. These children, although they were in care, they were the most vulnerable children in our society. They were being abused by technically strangers. And that fell within the remit of CID departments. CID saw these children, and actually police officers often saw these children as a nuisance, but CID definitely didn't want to become involved in this kind of investigation, because they were seen as making a lifestyle choice. That these were the kids that would go missing every weekend, and the abusers would target them because they knew they were vulnerable, take them away, pretend to be a boyfriend to start with, give them a bit of fun, take them for a ride in a car, take them out for the day, buy them a pizza. Then it becomes, give them a glass of booze. Then they get trolleyed on a full bottle of vodka. Then they are trapped in a world where those men then control them and would take them out and pass them round, gangs of men. They would make money. The children would be abused on a daily basis, and nobody wanted to do anything about it. That shocked and horrified me. And within the space of a few months, the times are hard to, but from the middle of 2004, was it 2004? Might even have been the end of 2003. But we started off with a small team of 3 officers, including me, and a DI, detective inspector. Within the space of a few weeks, we had a list of about 3 dozen children that we knew were being abused. And by the end of a few months, we had a list of 100 men that we knew were abusing these children. I went to the Gold Command Group in GMP, which was made. I actually went to speak to the head of crime, an assistant chief constable, begging for more resources. We got those resources. All that information was being put onto what's called a home system. It took some months, and in that time, I had to go off work to look after my husband in his final days. When I came back to work, that job had been buried. It had died a death. Nobody had been prosecuted. Those children were left to their own devices. The abusers were left to continue doing what they were doing, because I know an abuser doesn't stop abusing. And it shocked me to my core. I tried to get answers, but I was just a DC. I was told there was insufficient evidence, which I knew was not correct. I knew that was a lie, but I couldn't make any sense of it. And that was 2005. That has followed me now, Nick, for almost 20 years. And that really is where my journey in relation to child sexual abuse and my advocating for victims and fighting for justice for them began.
Well,
and that's the short answer, Nick.
Yeah. Well, at least now people know exactly where we are up to this day and what you do. Let me start by asking you a couple of questions that we only need quick answers. Some of these you'll feel you won't be able to give a quick answer, and if that's the case, then say there's no quick answer to this. But I just want to get into some of the nitty-gritty, nice and simple, before we get into some of the big questions. So some of the questions people have asked me to ask you is this issue of child sexual exploitation predominantly a male Pakistani heritage problem?
What I would say is, and it isn't a simple answer, but I'll keep it short. What I would say is that there are child abusers in every community. So whether it's a white middle class family, there is abuse in every community, whether it's the Catholic Church, whether it's Harvey Weinstein or Jeffrey Epstein, child abuse will never go away. What I have found in my experience, and I believe 100% to be the truth, is that the grooming gangs are made up predominantly of Pakistani Muslim men from a lower class within Pakistan. There are occasionally, I've come across it, Iranian, Iraq, Afghanistan, but in general, the facts show that that is the makeup of the abuser. I think it's worth mentioning here that strangely or suspiciously, whatever you would like to say, the authorities do not record the ethnicity of the offenders because they know full well that that is the case. You only have to look at all the cases that have now been exposed throughout the country since I started to talk out about it. And the photographs will show the ethnicity of those offenders. This is not me. I am not racist. For me, an abuser needs the law to deal with him. The children that they traditionally abuse are very vulnerable white children. Now, on Augusta, those children were all in care. And I use that word because that's the word that we refer to children who are not living in a family, but they are not cared for. They are neglected on a disgraceful scale. It breaks my heart to see how they are not protected. But even the children on my second big case, it was the Rochdale abuse scandal, which, I worked on to bring it into the public arena as program consultant on 3 girls. But in the Rochdale case, those children who were being abused by that grooming gang were not living in care. They were living in their homes, often one-parent families, often very difficult backgrounds. And the children were vulnerable because they were not in a family that would necessarily be capable of fighting that child's corner. So a mum might have had a nervous breakdown. There may be drug addiction in the family. There may be absent fathers. So that made them vulnerable too. And the abusers don't care where they get their victims from, as long as there's not going to be a big fuss kicked up about them from other people around. So they are very clever, very sophisticated, have gone unchecked for decades, and so have developed really advanced and sophisticated ways of trying to avoid detection, prosecution, accountability. But that is not the fault of those children. And as a society, I believe that we have to protect those who need protecting. And the job of the police and the criminal justice system is to prosecute those abusers, not to turn a blind eye. And back in 2008, I now know, I didn't know back then myself, but I now know from something that a former prosecutor, chief prosecutor, made public, is that the government sent out a circular from the Home Office to all police forces in 2008 to say, do not prosecute or do not focus on these crimes, because they were frightened of stirring up racial tension within the communities. So whilst I would say that, yes, in relation to the grooming gangs, I do believe that these children are seen as a commodity. I am not by any means saying that all abusers are from Pakistan. And I'm also saying that there are many people within that community who are good people. I would like to see the community itself stand up against this and be very vocal about that this is not right. That is where I would like to see more from that community itself, if I'm honest.
I don't know if I should I won't identify this person, but a very, 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 very close friend of mine, 30 years ago, used to work in children's homes. And she tells me stories over a 10-year period of her almost every Friday night ringing up the police and saying Jill has just left the home at 14, got into a car with 3 Asian men, got in a car with 4 white men, got in a van, doesn't matter. And she does this every weekend and she won't be back till Monday. I've got the car's registration. And every time she phoned the police every single time. And every single time the police said to her, if she doesn't come back on Monday, ring us again. Nobody was interested. And what we need to understand about our care system, and using the word care is an oxymoron. Children who we place into care, which is under the care of the state, do worse in life than anybody else. You're better off if you're sexually abused, physically abused, to be left with your parents. You will do better in life than if we take you away and put you in our care system. That's how bad our care system is.
100% agree, Nick. 100% agree. And as a police officer, I can assure you that it would be the absolute final solution that I would ever remove a child from their home. Because once you put them in a care home, they become a number and a commodity. And you get a whole series of different people coming on shift, going off shift. And I have been in that position. When I joined the police, I was 41. I had 4 children. And what I saw shocked me to my core. I could not believe what I was seeing. We had several care homes in and around Moss Side and Whalley Range and on my division. And as an older woman with 4 kids, in a team full of like young lads who wanted to be out in the fast cars, I was the person who would be sent to the rapes, to the domestic violence, to the missing from homes. We call them MFHs. And you're absolutely right. You'd walk in, usually on a Friday night, one of the members of staff there that was completely often disinterested or had become immune to this pattern of behaviour. And they saw reporting that child as just a procedure. And you'd go in and you'd fill a form in, and there'd be, even from the officers that I'd worked with, a lot of the lads would say, oh God, here we go again. Why do they report them as missing? They're not missing. They've gone out because they want to go out. They didn't recognise vulnerability. And I actually was involved in a whole review of the missing from home process. Sadly, that is still the case. There was a judgment at the start of the process that these children were asking for it. So even though they were the most vulnerable, they were the most failed, because that became the norm and nobody really addressed it. I remember one little boy who was 11 being in a home with like 16 and 17-year-old teenagers. He should never have been put in that home. And from day one, you could see that he was a tragedy waiting to happen. Within a few months, he was being found every weekend in Piccadilly Gardens in Manchester. He was being abused. He subsequently ended up dead at the age of 16. And I could see that happening. I put report after report. This child needs to be in secure accommodation. Nobody would pay for it, Nick. And that is still the case. Children in care are the most vulnerable. But there needs to be an attitude that sees these children as vulnerable and not just as a nuisance. And, I hear words all the time about how things have changed, but my work I've worked in this now for, nearly 20 years, and I have not seen a change. These kids are still being failed. And my work, I know we're going to come on to it later, but my work with my charity, the Maggie Oliver Foundation, we are contacted by victims and survivors every single day. And almost all of those have either been through that system or are currently in a place where they are being judged today, and the police are not taking their allegations seriously. And when you add that together with the statistics, which say that less than 2 in every 100 reported rapes or abuse ever reaches court, then that tells you all you need to know. Things have not changed, and we need to take this seriously.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I personally, in my charity, we've stopped about 15 girls being raped and abused and one boy. And the common factor between all those has always been they had no fathers at home. And that is the crux of many of our social problems, is a lack of fathers at home. And what that does to these vulnerable children is it makes them so-called easy meat, because you can abuse that child, you can take advantages of that child and that family because there's no threat of violence from a father. If you mess with a child who has a father at home, you have no idea how that father is going to react. So therefore you look for someone who's easier, less trouble. These children are let down by everybody. It starts with their parents letting them down and their fathers letting them down, and then everybody else just carries on the trend of letting them down.
I would agree with that in large part, Nick. But what I would say is that when a family, possibly a single parent family, is struggling and needs help and support, we should be putting that help in at an early stage, but nobody does. And they wait until things have fallen apart, and then they blame often the mum because she can't cope. So we could save, as a society, we could save millions of pounds further down the road if we intervened at the right point and gave help and assistance instead of blame and pushing somebody away. That for me, it needs a new way of dealing with things.
It's called prevention and early intervention.
Yeah, but it doesn't happen because they turn a blind eye and think, oh, somebody else's problem. Let's not look at it. And, but then it doesn't go away. It just gets worse. And in that delay, which can be years, it can be 20 years, that child will go through the most horrific years of their life. They will be sexually abused. They will be sold for sex. They will feel lost. They will then turn to drink. They often then turn to drugs. They often then themselves become single parents. The cost to them is immeasurable. At the foundation, we are picking up the pieces of those lives 20, 30 years down the road. We've had one lady come to us who was 72. She'd been abused as a teenager. We don't only help victims of grooming gangs. We help any survivor of sexual abuse, any adult survivor. That lady had struggled for 15 years with that, 50 years with that secret. But the trauma and the damage is done for life. So we need to be, I'm an ex-police officer, but for me, I am realistic, but I'm also honest, and I also communicate. And often there is not the evidence to prosecute. I accept that. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't care, we shouldn't do something, and we shouldn't support. And whether that's the police are the service of last resort for many of these kids, but they are also the opportunity for that child to have a future. And we need to somehow change their thinking so that they see that child as somebody to help, not necessarily as a witness or a commodity to assist a prosecution. If the prosecution isn't possible, it doesn't mean you just discard that child. You look at them as a person and see how they can be helped, but also that is a service to society as well as to that child. And often with trust and communication comes more information and an opportunity to prosecute the abusers. But at the moment, the whole system is just not working.
I agree. And a part of the reason, I think, is no one is ever held accountable for failings. Once you work in the public sector, you're almost unsackable unless you do something horrendous and then don't apologise for it. We don't hold people up the chain accountable. We don't say, look at what's happened under your leadership. You're fired. Let's look at the former Chief Constable of Greater Manchester Police. The police goes into special measures under his watch, and it all wasn't down to him. It'd been going on for a long time, but he was the final straw. And he gets to walk away with a gold-plated pension and a handshake. The mayor should have called him to the office and went, you're fired. He still should have got his pension because you pay for your pension. I don't want to be stripping people's pensions away what they've earned, but he should have He should have been sacked, but instead he got a golden handshake and walked away. So that leads me on to my next question, really. Greater Manchester Police, everything that's wrong with it to do with child sex exploitation, are we looking at corruption, or are we looking at incompetence, or are we looking at apathy where no one cares? Or a combination of all three?
You know, I constantly talk about accountability. And I would go a lot further than you. I would go much further. What I would say, first of all, is that I see chief constables as political pawns now. They are not independent people running an organisation that they have full control of. They are part of a network that is run from the government, and they do the bidding of the government, really. They are pawns in a game. And in my opinion, and I didn't know this back in 2005. I was so naive. I am not naive anymore. And that lack of naivety now is based on what I have seen. And I firmly believe that the way policing works, somebody is promoted, yeah? And when they go from constable to a sergeant to an inspector, there are exams. Once you start to get to DCI, superintendent, chief superintendent, detective chief superintendent, assistant chief constable, those ranks, you only get through those ranks if you are interviewed and you tick the boxes. I firmly believe that those ranks are to test whether you have got a real conscience and your loyalties lie with your victims, or whether you are able to let go of what you really know is wrong, and instead focus on what is best for the organisation. And so by the time, this is my opinion, by the time somebody reaches the rank of chief constable, they have been tested to the hilt. They've often got 30, 35 years of being brainwashed into a way of thinking that ordinary people don't think like. So you are dealing with a mindset, with a culture that is powerful, that will do anything to protect that organisation, that is defensive in the extreme. It took me 10 years to get them to acknowledge incompetence in the Rochdale case. Thankfully, we've now had that acknowledgement. With Operation Augusta, it took from 2005 to 2020, and me dedicating my life to exposing that corruption, that failure, to get the truth heard. So I think that it is, for me, the way to resolve this is to bring in people with different backgrounds, with different expertise into senior ranks. And I know that there is hostility against that. I firmly believe that you need skills and open-minded attitudes, not people who have been subjected, they're kind of like stuck in the Stockholm syndrome in a way. You know, they're in an echo chamber and they don't see the outside picture. But I also believe that we 100% need accountability for those at the top. And by that, I do mean criminal prosecutions. I really do believe that we should be seeing some very senior police officers prosecuted for gross neglect of duty, for misconduct in a public office. And I will take you back to Operation Augusta. Is this a good place to talk about the Andy Burnham's review, the mayor's?
Let's talk about Andy Burnham and the report he published in 2020. So yeah, tell me about that.
Well, I think it's important to say that after I resigned at the end of 2012, I constantly spoke out about the failures. I was like a broken record. I did a file on 4 about Rochdale, because that's why I resigned, because I saw a repeat of what I'd seen in Augusta on Operation Span, which was the Rochdale grooming scandal, as it's come to be known. And I resigned, but I had never forgotten Operation Augusta. So in every interview I did, I would refer to Augusta and I would refer to Operation Span. I did file on 4. That led to me being involved, being at the centre of the drama 3 Girls, where I worked for 4 years on that programme.
4 years? So that three-part series took 4 years.
Yeah. I mean, it wouldn't, yeah, it wouldn't have happened without me. I went out and I recruited on behalf of the drama team, all the people that were part of that story. And whilst I would say that it's done a fantastic job of explaining grooming, it did not go, in my opinion, nearly far enough in how they depicted the failures of the police, of the CPS, of the criminal justice system. The BBC will only go so far. So there's a lot of things in there that don't go far enough, and actually that are not true. But the overall picture it gave opened up the debate in a way that it never had been before. And also alongside that, I worked on a documentary called The Betrayed Girls, which was meant to be a sister program alongside the drama. There were a lot of internal politics around in the BBC, and that program was delayed for a few months, but that focused on Operation Augusta. And I did a lot of, and Operation Span at Rochdale, but I did a lot of media appearances after those two programs. And Andy Burnham, who I had already met, he is the Police and Crime Commissioner as well as the Mayor of Manchester. He heard me, he tells me that he heard me on a radio programme one afternoon going on about Augusta and how they'd shut a job down where we had 100 offenders on a database. GMP had neglected the duty. They knew this was happening. And I actually think that he probably thought I was telling lies, is my God's honest truth. And because I've rattled so many cages, maybe even thought, we're going to get her, we're going to sort her out, because I was being listened to. So he put together an independent review team, led by two, I think, are really good guys. Malcolm Newsom, who had been a very senior social worker, but he'd been involved in the Rotherham case, and Gary Ridgway, who was an ex-chief superintendent, I think, well, in a southern police force, but was retired. So they were commissioned to look at, first of all, Operation Augusta, and then at the Rochdale case. Subsequently, they put Oldham in the middle of it. So I was, that independent inquiry began when I was interviewed by them for hours and hours. I recorded my interview. My opening statement to them was, look, I will do my best to tell you what I know. I will tell you the truth, but from my experience up to here, I've learned to hope for the best, but expect the worst. Now, I didn't really expect anything to come of it, Gary, but it did. And in 2020, I was interviewed. I put them in touch with other victims, but Gary, as an ex-cop and as an ex-senior cop, was able to go into the GMP systems, the home system, which is a database. You can't delete anything off there once it's on. He scrutinized that. They did a really thorough investigation, and they 100% backed what I had said. And the findings of that review was, there was a big press conference, which GMP wouldn't attend. They held their own press conference. But that review reported that back in 2005, the Gold Command Group in GMP looked at Operation Augusta, and they deliberately and knowingly closed that investigation down. And the official reason in that report that was published was that they were not prepared to put the necessary resources into it. I find that shocking, criminal neglect, and disgusting. And even I was shocked about that. But that 5 senior officers, I think it was 4 or 5, whose names I know, but I won't say here, were then referred to the IOPC. And I cooperated with that inquiry as well. That's the Independent Office for Police Conduct. As people who know the police will know, the police investigate the police. And I see the IOPC as another internal network that, they become best buddies with the people that they're investigating. And you never end up with any kind of accountability at the end of it. But they reported in last year, I think it was, after another 2-year inquiry. So bear in mind now we've had 6 years of an independent inquiry. Whilst they published and acknowledged the veracity of Burnham's independent review, they said that the 5 officers who were named as being present, 4 of them present in that meeting where the decision was made, all refused to be interviewed. And in the absence of their testimony, they were unable to take any further action. So those officers made a decision to abandon those children, allow those abusers to go free, continued to abuse for another 15 years. GMP have now been forced to reopen that original investigation, renamed it Operation Green Jacket, but nobody will be held to account. And for me, that is wrong. And we have to change the law to ensure that that can't happen. I would be saying, well, if none of them will say who made that decision, then they should all be charged with neglect of duty. A bit like in a murder trial, when you get a conspiracy, if you get 2 guys who, one of them has murdered somebody and they will not speak, they both get charged with murder. It's joint enterprise. So that's why I have no faith in the system. I hear that, everything that's going on in the Met right now. I hear the commissioner there making all these statements, and I know that at the end of the day, they are above the law in many respects. And I would like to see that change. I would like to see a senior officer held to account in a court of law. And I truly believe that should that happen, every single chief constable would make decisions in a different way, because they would consider what might happen to them further down the road. And I do think they should lose their pension. If they are found guilty of gross neglect of duty, of misconduct in a public office, they are in a position of trust. As a country, we depend on them to have ethics, to act with integrity, to be honest, to be working on behalf of the country and of the victims who need them. And if we know that they are not doing that, then I would throw the book at them. I would, because they are getting away with murder in many respects. And I think that is unforgivable.
It is unforgivable. The way you change people is you make it personal to them. So if chief constables are making poor decisions, if it then affects them down the line and they're held accountable and they lose their job, they're depromoted, depending whatever the issue is, that's how we get change in these organisations. But in the whole of the public sector, when something goes wrong, the first thing is, go get the cover-up book. How do we cover this up? Not for my benefit, but for the reputation of the organisation. We have it in the NHS, we have it at the council, we have it absolutely everywhere. Can you name one government report, one government inquiry that ever led to someone being punished or someone being held accountable? No.
You know what, Nick, I can't. And I've been involved in quite a few independent reviews now. I have to say that the Augusta review blew me away. I'm hoping that Opspan review will reveal the same honesty. The Oldham review, which I wasn't really involved in other than with one victim, has had a lot of criticism. So I'm hoping, I mean, there isn't time to go into all that. But what I would say, I've just lost my thread. I was just going to say about accountability and chief police officers. We
should sack them when they make these monumental scale mistakes. They should be sacked.
Yeah, I was just going to say I was involved. I've been involved now in numerous reviews, including the National Abuse Inquiry. And that was a monumental missed opportunity. The other thing I would say, in all these reviews, they make recommendations, but they are not obligations. And we end up with another serious case review about a child that's ended up dead. And those questions are raised because no action is taken. We all know where the failures are. We need people who have to take responsibility. And for me, the book stops at the top. And unfortunately, those people at the top are protected by very powerful legal departments and public relations departments, and they're actually out of touch with what's going on at the bottom. I don't always blame the individual because they are being fed information. They can't keep abreast of everything, but we have to find a way to cut through that. And saying you didn't know when you didn't understand, that is your job to know. I mean, in my charity, that we've now got a team of over 40 people. We advocate for victims who are being failed by the system. We also offer emotional support. And any of your listeners who feel that they need help being heard, or they want somebody to talk to help them pick up their lives, they can self-refer through our website, www.themaggieoliverfoundation.com. But we are kind of a messenger between the victim and the police force often. And we have built some really good relationships now with police forces, but it invariably depends on the commitment and the empathy and the professionalism of the individual officer. It is too hit and miss to be worthwhile, really. We need a system that doesn't need somebody to fight a victim's corner. That should be their God-given right. And I know that I have upset a lot of people, that there are many people in authority who see me as the enemy. I really am not. But I have always spoken the truth, and I feel that I am the spokesperson for all those victims. And it's been over 3,000 in the 3 years since we've been since I started the foundation, since I started the charity. I feel that I am the spokesperson for those victims, and I have to say the truth. And whether that makes me the enemy, which I'm not, I am their best friend. I am if the police truly want to do what they say they want to do, which is to put a victim at the center of the legal process, to care for victims, look after them, to listen to them. We are there to help them do that. But if they are intent on silencing those victims, on blaming them, of pushing them away, then I'm going to say that. I am not going to cover up. And many of the groups that I've been involved in, whether it's stakeholder groups or the ICSA inquiry, many of those people involved in that are not ex-police officers, first of all. They often don't understand the system and are reluctant to be either shut out of those groups or to upset senior people in those organizations because they're looking at their own career pathway. I'm not. Nick, I am talking the truth as I see it, and I am trying to share that truth with people throughout the country and people in positions of authority, to give them an opportunity to change what is clearly a broken system. And the whole country knows that now. I knew it long before the rest of the country, but now it is an open secret. And, tinkering around the edges will not put it right. We need a whole new system in policing, in the courts, in the CPS. We need, in my opinion, a Royal Commission looking at policing in the 22nd century, because it is not the same as it was 100 years ago. I'm not blaming individual police officers. They are underpaid. They are undervalued. There are not enough of them. They are, often overwhelmed with crime queues that are inhuman amounts to cover. And yet when the shit hits the fan, basically, they are the ones that are sent to the cleaners. But it is not their fault often. Alongside that, I would like to see much better communication. I would like to see organisations like the Foundation being the link between the police and the victim. I accept that the police officer often doesn't have the time to pick up the phone to all their victims every week, but somebody needs to do it. And there is no reason why they can't rely on organisations like ours to pick up that slack. But there is a real resistance within the police to do that, to share some responsibility, to delegate responsibility, to look at new ways of doing things. They are stuck in the dark ages and they are resistant to anything which would bring them into the 23rd century. And in that, I include bringing in people from outside the police who has got that expertise, who can see things from a different angle. So, that is where I give my opinion. And that is based on, a lifetime of experience of dealing with people, of dealing with victims, of being a police officer for 16 years, and now running my own charity. And every day this is my life. So I know that I'm talking a lot of truth and a lot of sense. And all I can do.
Let's end with the only good thing to come out of these decades of frustration and pain, and that's the Maggie Oliver Foundation. So the good work you're doing now, that's your only highlight of any of this. Let's end with, tell us a bit about your foundation, what it does, how people can get involved, what you're doing, anything you want.
Thank you, Nick. Well, it came from me being absolutely bombarded on a daily basis with thousands of messages and pleas for help, and I was going under. I wrote my book and it came out, and I thought, you know what? I want anybody who needs help to have somewhere to go. How can I create that? I can't do it all on my own. So I thought, I know what, I'll start a charity, not realizing just what a monumental mountain of effort that takes. And it's taken over my whole life. But I am so proud of where we are now, because in 3.5 years, I now have a team of almost 40 people. We have volunteers. I have a staff team of, I think it's 6 people. We have ex-police officers. Many of our volunteers are themselves survivors, so they have an empathy. We believe in kindness, in empathy, in non-judgmental dealing with victims, and listening and trying to help. So, as I said before, any victim, any survivor can self-refer to us, and we will answer you and we will try to help. So we have half of the foundation run by our wonderful Shaz, who is our support services manager, with a team of about 30 volunteers. And we offer emotional support, but weekly support with the same volunteer, the same ambassador who is fully trained. So they don't have to keep repeating their story to a new person every week, which, if they want to pick up the phone to the Samaritans, that is a fantastic service. But if they ring back next week, they repeat the same conversation. So we listen to the survivors and the victims, and they want continuity. They want to build trust with somebody. So we offer at least 8 weeks initially, and then if needed, another 8 weeks. We pay for some of our survivors to go through group therapy courses led by a trauma-informed psychotherapist who runs the London Trauma Centre. So we are looking at their recovery, and our motto is transforming pain into power, because everybody's on a journey, Nick, and we need people to hold our hand along that journey and help us to recover. So the emotional support side does exactly that. On the other side, we run a legal advocacy service. So if somebody comes to us who is being abused, has been abused, has approached the police or wants to approach the police and is unhappy with the service they have received, they come to us and we will listen to them and we will advise them as ex-police officers in what the process is. So whether we advocate for them and go to that police force and say, look, this case we believe warrants investigation, or they've not been communicated with, or we advise the victim, they can put in a victim's right to review, they can seek CICA compensation, they can go to the IOPC. So that's the legal advocacy side. And the third thread we call the force for change. And really, I'm the umbrella, I'm the chair of the foundation and I'm the founder. I've got a board of trustees, but I'm in the middle and I keep abreast of what's going on to keep things current and this is not a historical problem. We are seeing it every day. And I try and share those stories and my expertise and victim stories and survivor stories with people like you to reach an audience. Anybody who feels that they would like to join us as a volunteer, you can apply through the website. Anybody we are a small private, a small charity, a national charity, but we are not funded by the police, by the authorities. We have been funded by the public. And for me, it is critical that we retain the ability to tell the truth. And if we mix our truth telling with the financial survival of the foundation, that would undermine my ability to speak the truth. And I would rather that the foundation does not exist than have to compromise the message of telling the truth from the victims. So if you've got any of your listeners who would like to even make a small monthly donation, £5 a month, £10 a month, £50 a month, that is what keeps us going. Much of our work is done by volunteers, but we do have to have staff as well to manage the organisation, and we are growing. And again, you can donate through our website. We don't have high overheads. We don't run fancy offices. We do most things on Zoom and on a phone system that we have, but we do need some money. So, volunteering or even spreading the word, share a post, follow my Maggie Oliver UK, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook page. We've got a foundation, the website shares lots of stories. So all those ways are ways that, I would really value help, because we need help. Those who want to...
We can't leave it to people just like you. This is a fight for all decent citizens of this country to be involved. They all can't be Maggie Oliver, but they all can talk about this, tell their friends about it, make sure the police are doing a better job, share stuff online. Everyone needs to be involved. This isn't a one-man crusade or a one-woman crusade. We all live in this country, and these children are all our children at some extent.
100% agree, Nick. I haven't sought it, but in a way I've become a voice for these victims. And that is a privilege, and I feel very honoured to be here. I sometimes think maybe this was where I was meant to be in my life, because I didn't look for it. Nobody would have ever thought I'd be a police officer, but that has added knowledge and value and experience to my voice. But really all I'm fighting for is what I've believed in all my life, Nick. Honesty, integrity, kindness, empathy, justice. Those things I didn't learn from becoming a police officer. I had them inside me already. And what I wonder is why we keep on seeing increasingly police officers who don't appear to have those values. And I still believe that if somebody joins the police, inside them, that is what they want to do. I believe, though, that when they get in, as happened to me, there is a concerted effort to kind of squeeze those things out of a person and ensure that they follow orders. And if they are being given orders by people who don't believe that, over a period of time, they become frightened of voicing their concerns, particularly if they are young men and women who are frightened of losing their job and don't have the life experience and I don't know, bloody mindedness really of what I went into at the age of 41. So I think, but please, if anybody thinks they can help in any way, we would value that help.
I'll put all those details in the links in the description of the video, so people can press the link. It'll take you straight to everything you've talked about. Two final points. The first point is, part of the problem with the police is they've lowered their recruitment standards so much over the last 20, 30, 40 years. that they will almost employ anybody now. And we see that on a weekly basis by police officers being arrested for fraud, for theft, for sexual assault, for murder. We've lowered the bar so much to get probably diversity, more different voices into the police. So the police have one job, is to protect society. And finally, my last point will be the worst incident I had with Greater Manchester Police was in 2015. My charity was working on the streets in Manchester city centre in a well-known area for male prostitution. And we came across someone who looked young. Turned out he was 14. And we went, he looks younger than 18. So we phoned the police to say there's a safeguarding issue here. We've got this young lad, he's in a prostitution area, he's got men round him, like flies round excrement. And we phoned up the police on 999, and the police call handler said to us, so you're reporting a rent boy in the gay area. What do you want to do about a rent boy? And we had to say to the call handler, first of all, put your supervisor on. And secondly, you used the term yourself, boy. That's why we're ringing you, because there's a boy in harm's way here. Police turned up, we got it all sorted out. But that was the worst incident I have had with GMP.
And it's, many of the victims who come to us have had similar experiences. And, I could go into dozens. I think what I would say is that you're quite right that there are people joining the police now who are not prepared and not right for the role. But I would link that I'd go back to, reducing the number of police and bringing in PCSOs. A PCSO is not a police officer. Salaries are very low. Why would you put yourself through something like being a police officer when you can more or less get that for being a manager in McDonald's? Even when I joined, it was a career for life. You had a good pension. People, used to get housing allowance. You used to get dental treatment. You were a respected member of the community. You knew your community. Now you are a commodity. And, they're being used and abused as a police officer. They're not being valued. The training is insufficient. The experienced cops that I'm still in contact, I'm still friends with many ex-colleagues. They can't wait to get out because they are undervalued, they are underpaid, they are under-resourced, they are pedaling backwards, and it's the leadership that needs to step up and fight for those decent people who have joined the police. They need to be going to the Home Office saying, we need money, not pretending that everything is now better. When I hear another senior officer saying, things have changed, this was in the past, this is historical, it's bullshit. And for me, a chief constable should be shouting that from the rooftops, not doing the bidding of somebody who's looking at a budget. Money should not be the issue when choosing to properly support public services. And I know we're talking about the police, but our country is on its knees. We've got the NHS not fit for purpose. We've got the police, not doing the job. We've got the CPS understaffed. We've got courts falling apart with no police officers at police stations. We've got teachers now on strike. Our country, when I was born, was strong and proud, and it's inadequate leadership that has led to where we are. And I'm not a party political person, and I lay this at the door of all political parties. And I want to see somebody come in who will take a grip and actually do what this country needs. A monumental task, because it's gone so low that there are crises in every public service. But somebody's got to do it, or we're going to end up as a third world country. So that's my sermon for today.
Let's end with something we both agree on, which is we both are calling for a royal commission into policing for the modern age because they're not fit for purpose. Me and you are huge supporters of the police and we want them to be successful, but we need a royal commission. So let's end on that. Maggie, thank you so much for coming on my podcast. It's been great talking to you. And anything I can ever do for you, just ask.
My pleasure. Thanks, Nick. Thanks for speaking to me. Send me the link when you've got it and I will share it.
Will do. Thank you. Bye bye.
Thanks, Nick. Bye bye.